Opening the Inner Mind, Metapsychology and the Masters of Wisdom. So I wondered if you could start with telling us about the approach you came to with this book.
Okay, so this is volume 1 of 8 volumes that have actually been written. Now, the next 7 volumes have not been published yet, but this is the first of these 8 volumes. And the idea behind these 8 volumes is to really bring together in a nexus of materials all of the esoteric materials pertaining to Gurdjieff and Ouspensky. So to bring it into a lucid and clear fashion, because I found from some friends who are from Europe and various different locations around the world, when I pass on Ouspensky to them, they find it very difficult and too intellectual to read, to understand, and to really get to grips with. So the idea came to me to write a nexus of materials that would be more lucid, more straightforward and less intellectual than Ouspensky. Valuable though, I must admit, Ouspensky's material really is. It is highly valuable. I think for a lot of people it may prove a stumbling block in approaching this subject. So I decided to write it in a more simple fashion, more straightforward, and to present it in a modern format, because Ouspensky's book is like, I think it's 60, 70 years old now. And it's written in a very particular type of English. Some people classify it as wartime English, which may or may not be true. But it's definitely in a slightly different style of English than modern times. So I thought, let's bring this material up to speed in the 21st century, because that material is really 20th century material. So I thought, let's bring this material into the 20th century and see if I can present it in not so much a superior mode or a superior fashion, but a more lucid fashion and a more clear fashion for people to approach.
I wonder if you could just quickly explain who Peter Ouspensky was.
Okay, so Peter Damianovich Ouspensky was probably one of the key students of Gurdjieff, the great esoteric teacher. And Ouspensky had a particular penchant for esotericism and esoteric materials. From his very early days, Ouspensky was interested in these subjects in a very deep way and in a very real fashion. And he went to India seeking knowledge, seeking paths of enlightenment. And he found that everything he encountered in India demanded too much, that he had to give up his whole outer life to follow various paths, various gurus, and various yogic schools. So he decided when he was in India that he couldn't possibly do that. He needed a system which was more lucid, which was more practical, and what he said was that he would know where he was actually going with that system, because many of the systems he found in India, they couldn't tell him actually what direction he was going and where he would reach, and they couldn't tell him all of the different steps. So he found this very disconcerting, and he decided that he would come back to Russia with what he had found and discuss what he'd found with his friends in Moscow and St. Petersburg, which he did. But what he didn't know during this time was that Gurdjieff and his groups in Moscow were actually following his travels in India. And Gurdjieff was talking to his students about Ouspensky and how he was not going to find the deeper levels of esotericism in his travels, because these are actually hidden and they're not on the surface of life or the surface of society. But Ouspensky was not to know this, so Ouspensky basically came back to Russia more or less empty-handed, but with a lot of experience in his travels. And then he met a friend who talked to him about Gurdjieff, and he had an introduction to Gurdjieff, and he was very, very impressed with what he found, and he was very impressed with Gurdjieff's knowledge. And so he met at the famous cafe, which you probably know about, and he was very disturbed because he said that when he met him, Gurdjieff looked very poorly disguised, like an Arab sheikh disguised as a Westerner, but he was like puzzled. This man emanated such power and emanated such grace in his movements and emanated such grace in his wisdom and his knowledge. And he said later to his friends that he'd never encountered one person who encapsulated such wisdom in one human being. And actually, when he came back to the Stray Dog Cafe in St. Petersburg, he said to his then girlfriend at the time and his friends, he said, "I think we have found at last the miracle." And he was referring to Gurdjieff. And so he spoke to all his friends about his encounter with Gurdjieff, and later he became a member of one of Gurdjieff's St. Petersburg groups. And he became a key figure in these groups. But with Ouspensky, he didn't really want to participate in things like the movements or the sacred dances. His mindset was that he wanted the knowledge, and he wanted to probably formulate this knowledge into books and to put it out into society in this fashion. And I think from memory he had a deal with Gurdjieff on this subject, and Gurdjieff says you can do this, but only when you truly understand the material. Now the caveat here was that later in London he met Gurdjieff for the last time. It was in the early 20s. And he met Gurdjieff, I believe it was in Hampstead. And Gurdjieff said to Ouspensky, I have read your book and I am very impressed. In Search of the Miraculous, Fragments of an Unknown Teaching. But if you truly understood everything profoundly that you've written in this book, I would come and bow down before you. So he asked Ouspensky to come back and to train with him in a practical way and to leave behind the intellectual path and to work very profoundly and very deeply on his own spiritual progress. But Ouspensky refused. Ouspensky had his own path plotted out in front of him, and he had his own mindset, and he had this willful way where he wanted to go forward in his own way, in his own fashion, and he didn't want to have somebody who was telling him what to do. He had this type of personality that he found it very difficult to receive instructions, spiritual instructions, or other kinds of instructions from somebody who might be his superior. So he refused to actually go back to Gurdjieff and to work on a profound level on himself, and he went his own way on his own path from then on, and that was their last meeting they ever had.
As you say, he was more from the intellect side of Ouspensky, but Gurdjieff was teaching intellect, emotional and physical, a free-way path.
Yeah.
And I believe that's what your books are about.
Yes, I'm trying to make the books not only lucid but practical, so that people can, when they approach this material, I would suggest that they really meditate upon it, really absorb it, because esoteric material you cannot approach in an intellectual way. You cannot approach it in an intellectual format, because if you do, you will completely miss the mark. You will overshoot the runway, as it were. You will totally miss the point. This material has not only got to be studied, but it's got to be used in your life. So most of the materials we find in life today, even with modern psychology, people just merely study them, memorize them, and then just say that was really interesting and discuss it at parties with their friends. But esoteric material is not like that. Esoteric psychology is about really using it in your life from day one. So what you understand day one, you put it into practice day one. And there's a slight degree of difficulty here, but the results are very, very interesting and truly amazing if you really work with this and run with this, and if you have a sincere heart. As the Sufis say, the higher Sufis, if you have a true heart, miracles will happen. And it's really like that with Gurdjieff's material and with Ouspensky's material. It's really like that. If you really approach it from the heart, deep in the heart, and approach it from the point of view of being humble and sincere, and not from the ego. You cannot approach the subject from the ego. If you approach it from the ego to use it as a discussion point at parties or in your local pub, this is a huge mistake, because you will totally miss the point, miss the mark. So I would suggest to people who are interested in the subject to really approach it in a different way than the intellectual way. Approach it from the heart. Of course, the intellect is involved when you study this material. It's part and parcel of how we do things in modern times, but the key thing is that we approach it from the heart. While we're studying and using the intellect, we must use the emotions as well. Bring the emotions into the study, and it becomes a different entity. The whole process of studying this material and absorbing it and using it is a totally different dynamic than anything you will find in institutions, universities or schools. It's a totally different dynamic.
Well, with this material, the whole point of it is to obviously read about it and learn from it, so that you can go on and then become and to be.
Yes, there are different levels in that phrase to be. There are different levels. And the first level, of course, is really to absorb the material and make it your own. This is one of the things that Gurdjieff stressed time after time. He said, make it your own. But he also said, question everything. Do not take it on board as a fait accompli in any way. Do not take anything for granted. But you must verify everything for yourself. And of course, we cannot verify every single element to this material, but we can verify probably 90% of this in our own personal experience and our own personal understanding and our own personal emotional life. And this is one of the key things for me, because when I started to study this material many years ago, I was verifying a lot of it in my ordinary life, and it became something real. It had real veracity, it had real authenticity. It wasn't just something intellectual in a book that I was reading and talking about to my friends. It was something that I was using every day, a dynamic which was quite powerful, and it was raising my cognitive level. I was seeing things that I was not seeing before. I was understanding things that I was not understanding before. I was understanding facets of myself that became clear and became open. It was like I was opening this door into a new portal of understanding. And this became a very big dynamic in my life, and I wanted more. I didn't want to go in reverse gear. I wanted more. I wanted to go deeper. I wanted to go further. I wanted to share this with other people in the form of workshops, to share this very interesting facet of life that most people do not even notice.
And you do give workshops?
Yes, there are workshops planned for 2019, the summer of 2019, and we hope to do workshops in London, and we welcome all people from all diverse backgrounds, countries. Everybody is welcome.